And I'm modifying a little bit to make it a little easier for you because I'm just that kind of person. I'm just kind to you. All right? So what we're talking about is if you got quadratic equations and there's no k that's by itself or x by itself or m by itself. So see how we have just k squared and then numbers? Y'all see that? So if we have just the squared variable and numbers, it's a lot easier to solve that. So all we have to do is the basic algebra skills that we've known all along to solve it. So how are we going to solve this? What do we do to get that k by itself? What's our first step going to be? How are we going to get rid of that 6? Subtract that 6, right? Now this very first one's super easy because we come up with k squared equals 0, right? And so what's our next step going to be? How do you unsquare something? Square root it. So on this very first one, we're just going to get k is 0. I mean, it's that easy. And it only has one answer because 0 is the only answer there is. K is 0, right? But let's talk about number 3 real quick because it's a little bit different. So on number 3, what's our first step going to be? Subtract the 4. And so we've got n squared equals 36, right? And then our next step is we're going to take the square root of both sides, right? Now this is where we need to have a chat. Because what we always put as our answer would be 6, right? We'd say we take the square root of 36 and we know that that's 6. Here's the problem though. It's not just 6. Remember, square root means what number times itself gives me this number. And 6 times 6 definitely gives me 36. But there is another number that times itself also gives me 36. Does anybody know what that is? What about negative 6? Is negative 6 times negative 6 also 36? So when we take the square root of 36, the answer is not just 6. The answer is 6 or negative 6, positive 6 or negative 6. Now, sometimes you would need to write that as 2 separate numbers, but we have this little symbol that we can use to represent both of them. This little positive and negative stacked like that. And we would read this as positive or negative 6. Okay? So every answer you have today should include that positive or negative because every answer is going to be either positive or negative unless it's 0. If it's 0, there's not a positive or negative. All right? Let's do number 2. What would you do on number 2 to get that v by itself? Divided by 25? Is that what you said? Is that what you said? Okay, so let's divide by 25. Now, we can just leave this like this, or we can plug it in the calculator. Either way, it doesn't matter. If we just leave it like that for a few minutes, that's fine, and then we'll deal with it in a minute, okay? Now, what's our next step going to be? How do we get rid of that squared? Square root. So we're going to square root both sides, right? So on our calculator, we can do 1 divided by 25, then square root it. Or we can do the square root and then do 1 over 25. Either way is fine. It doesn't matter. And we get 1/5, right? Now, do y'all know what 1/5 is as a decimal? 0.2. 0.2. Now, if you don't know, though, you know you can just do 1 divided by 5, right? That gets you your answer. 0.2. So, this is positive or negative 0.2. So, today you're going to round to the nearest tenth. That's the part I'm making easier for you because the answers are supposed to be just simplified radical forms, and I'm not making you do that because I'm a kind person. I'm just being kind to you today. All right, what's our next step? What are we going to do next? Okay, on number 4. What are we going to do on number 4? Add 2. That's going to give me x squared equals 19. Then what? Square root it. And so I can just plug that in my calculator and get a number to round to the nearest tenth. On your calculator, do you see the button that says x squared right there? See how it's above it in blue? Oh, it drives me crazy. So the square root of what? 19? So what is that? Round to the nearest tenth. 4.4. That 5 tells you to go up with the 3. So 4.4. So it's positive or negative 4.4, and that's our answer. All right, now look at number 5 with me. What are we going to do here? We got a few more steps on this one. Add the 3, right? Add the 3. So we've got 9r squared equals 149. And then what? We could square root right here. We totally could. But we also could divide by 9. We can do either one of them. And it doesn't matter to me which way you go with this. But I'm going to go ahead and divide by 9. Oh, I forgot. That's a negative 149, right? So we've got r squared equals negative what? Negative what? Right there. This math right here. 16.5. Okay, then what's our next step? What are we going to do next? What do we still got to do? Square root it. So we take the square root of both sides. Now, here's where you're going to have an issue. Yeah. So if you plug this in your calculator, you're going to get one of two things. One of two things is going to happen. You will either get, hang on. I know. You're either going to get this. See how it says non-real answer, right? Or possibly if whoever had your calculator second period put it in imaginary number form, you might get this. Now, here's the deal. You can't take the square root of a negative number because square root means what number times itself, right? And a negative number comes from a positive times a negative. And a positive times a negative is not a number times itself. That's two different numbers. So you can't actually take the square root of a negative number. So here's what I think happened. Back in the old days, early Greece, and these philosophers were discovering all this math and figuring it out. And somebody was like, oh, my goodness, you can't take the square root of a negative. And I figured there was some guy there who was probably a lot like Jonathan. And he was probably like, you want to bet? I can do it. And so he created this imaginary number system so that he could prove that he could still take the square root of a negative number. That's what I figured happened, right? I wasn't there. I'm not that old. But that's what I think probably went down. And see what they were like, you can't do it. And he was like, I'll show you I can, right? So here's what he did. He said, you know what we can do? We can split this up into the square root of negative 1 and the square root of 16.5. And then we can take the square root of 16.5. It'll be a decimal. It's going to be irrational, but, we can still do it. We can find a number for that. And that number would be 4.1, right? So that's going to be 4.1. And then we're going to just take this part of it, the square root of -1. We're going to call it I. It's going to stand for the imaginary part of this number. So this is going to stand for the real part of the number, but then we're going to tack on this I and call that imaginary number. And boom, I just took the square root of a negative number. Now, on your calculator, if you go into mode, y'all know we've played with mode a little bit. If you look down almost to the bottom where it says the word real, y'all see that? The second option where it says A plus BI, the I, that's imaginary. So if you put it on that number, then you can use your calculator and you'll look at the end of this. See how there's an I down there? So it did the imaginary number. Okay? Okay, look at number 6 with me. What you gonna do? Bad boys, bad boys. What you gonna do?
Add 5.
Add 5. David thought I was talking to him. He looked up. Okay, so we got 9r squared equals 612. Now what? We could, and let's do that because you've been wanting to do that every time. So let's take the square root of it. So it's going to give us 3r. Oh, by the way, I forgot that plus or minus over here a while ago. We got to stick that back on there. 3r, and then whatever the square root of 612 is. I don't know what that is. 24.73. Okay, and then we're going to divide that by 3, right? But remember, it does have to be positive or negative. So 8 point what? Go 10. Go to the nearest 10. 8.2. I'm going to assume.
The 6 runs up to 4. And that runs up to the...
No, you only look at the one right after it. So like, what were we doing here? 24.73 divided by 3. So this 4 right here tells me what to do with this digit. Whatever is behind the 4 doesn't make any difference. Because basically what you're saying is, am I closer to 0.30, 30, or am I closer to 0.20? So what's behind this doesn't matter. Did you put in 24.73? So you left it as the square root of 612? You didn't round it? And that's why. Because it's slightly different based on rounding. I rounded, you didn't round. Yours is more accurate than mine. Yeah. Still round to the nearest 10th close enough, right? All right, number 7 is the last one we're going to do together, and then I'm going to let y'all work, okay? So what do we do on number 7? What you going to do? Add 10. So we're going to have negative 5n squared equals negative 320. Then what? Divide by negative 5. So we've got n squared equals positive 64. Then what? Square root of both sides. So n equals and that's your answer. Now, on your interactive worksheet, there is a button that has this positive or negative symbol. Okay? So whenever you open up when you go to type in I have it set up to where the math box will pop up, and it has that positive or negative symbol in there. Okay? All right. So your assignment is to 16. You have 9 problems. You have 9 problems, and you have 30 minutes. I feel strongly you can finish.